Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth.
And welcome into the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network Team Autopsy Report. We're in Chapel Hill. We're pulling up into Tobacco Road. We got to take a look at the 2024 North Carolina Tar Heels. I think there's a lot to unpack, and there's some significant reasons why this team made the move at the head coaching spot that it made. Let's begin with where we normally like to start with. And if this is your first podcast or watching on YouTube with us, welcome aboard. If you've been around for a few of these, thank you as well. We're always going to start right there with the betting total. This team had a season win betting total back in June of 7.5. That had no chance of getting to the window because this team completely underperformed in a lot of areas, especially on the defensive side of the ball and especially in one-score contests. We'll be talking about that over the next 25 minutes or so. So failed to meet expectations there. When we look at our composite win total based on three very important criteria for judging how a team should perform during the season, we actually had them at 6.8. So this team should have been a 7-1 win team for us, so still came up a game short of that expectation. Now, we look at two other vital pieces of data when giving out our final grade. What was your strength of schedule? And largely, you can impact your strength of schedule in the non-conference. Did you play a difficult non-conference or did you load up on cupcakes? The second part, you really can't control. How did your opponents perform throughout their season? That's your strength of record. So let's start with the strength of schedule. The Tar Heels sat with a .308. Folks, that's at the bottom end of what a Power 5 team should be. So you're now looking at maybe one of the weakest strength of schedules as far as a Power 4 team if they're playing stiffer competition. Now, their strength of record also tells us a story. .508. That's the 84th strength of record out of 134 teams last year. So not only did you not play a daunting schedule, your opponents during the regular season last year did not have a lot of wins underneath their belt. So opportunities were missed by the Tar Heels. And as we like to do, we're going to get into the offense first. We're going to go through the NCAA averages, what this team did as far as their raw accounting stats go in the regular season, and then we're going to adjust for opponent. So if we can get that up on the screen here, if you're watching on YouTube or our Twitter feed at Crunch Time VIP, thank you. If you're listening on the podcast, don't worry, I got you covered. I'm going to go through those data points right now for you. So when I talk about strength of record and how North Carolina had one of the weakest strength of records, this is the evidence that backs that up. I want you to count how many teams had 8 or more wins on this schedule. So Minnesota, 7-5. Charlotte was 5-7. Then they play an FCS team in NC Central, followed by James Madison, 8-4. Duke was 9-3. Pitt and Georgia Tech both 7-5. Virginia was 5-7. Florida State was 2-10. Wake was 4-8. Boston College was 7-5 and ended the year with North Carolina State 6-6. Folks, only 2 of their opponents got to at least 8 wins last year, and this team still lost 6 games in the regular season. That tells me a coaching change needed to be made. Now, we use a baseline of 68. 68 Power 4 teams for major conferences in Notre Dame. That's where we get that baseline of 68. How many of North Carolina's opponents' defense were inside of that top 68? Minnesota was 18th. James Madison was 48th. Duke was 45th. Pitt, 56th. Georgia Tech was 15th. Virginia, 65th. Florida State, 51st. And then finally, Boston College, 55th. 8 of their opponents were inside of that top 60, top 68. If you want to look at it a little bit deeper, their average opponent, if we average these out, would have been ranked about 58th. You're talking about a team that would have been probably around the 6-6 mark. And that's kind of where North Carolina finished. We'll talk about the one-score games. If you're looking on YouTube or on our Twitter feed, this team struggled in one-score games. Going to be talking about that here in just a moment. Okay, let's get to the offense. If I had to bullet point this offense before I get into the breakdown, I would say it was balanced, but certainly ineffective in key situations. Let me give you the NCAA averages on some of these stats that I'm going to be talking about here. Average team points per game on offense last year, 28 points per game. Average passing production for each team, about 227 yards per game, 160 yards rushing is about what teams averaged last year. And then finally, total offense, you're looking at about 387 yards per game. With those numbers in mind, let's give you North Carolina's. Their points per game, regular season will say 32.3 points per game. When we adjust for opponent, just goes down about a field goal, down to about 29.4 points per game. So still above the NCAA average there. As far as their passing game goes, 233 yards per game passing. When we adjust that for opponent, absolutely spot on. 233 yards per game. Their rushing offense behind Omarion Hampton, and all of my NFL fans that are listening to this, get real familiar with that name. I'm going to be talking about his numbers here in just a moment. North Carolina averaged about 190 yards per game rushing. When we adjust for opponent, 193. Total offense, 423 yards of total offense per game. So not horrible there. Now, let's dig a little bit deeper into these numbers. The average team scored about 40% of the time when they had the ball, whether it was a touchdown or field goal. North Carolina was at 43.4, so about 4 percentage points better than the average. Solid. Average team scoring touchdowns on their drives, about 28, let's call it 29%. North Carolina was at 33%. So again, a little bit better than the average. On third downs, NCAA average last year per team was about 39%. North Carolina just a hair above that at 40%. Now, average team gave up about 23 and a half sacks per game. North Carolina gave up 26. Also committed 16 turnovers. So not a horrible job of committing turnovers, but you want to be a little bit closer to almost 1 turnover per game. So not horrible as far as the turnovers go. We'll see how that impacted their wins and losses. Now, what we do here at the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network is we go even beyond the advanced numbers. So we look at 3 E's, as we like to call it: how effective, how explosive, and how efficient your team offense was in 2024. When we look at North Carolina, as far as being an effective offense, 56th. As far as being explosive, 40th. And as far as being efficient, 48th. The Tar Heels finished the season last year as our 48th rated offense last year. And if I had to highlight the bright spot, it was that running back, Omarion Hampton, in last year, 281 carries, 1,660 yards rushing, 5.9 yards per rushing attempt, 15 rushing touchdowns. The young man averaged 138 yards per game on the ground. Also is a weapon out of the backfield. 38 receptions, 373 yards receiving, 9.8 yards per reception, 2 receiving touchdowns. So if you add up what he averaged on the ground and as a receiving threat, he was about good for about 170 yards per game in total offense. This young man, get familiar with his work at the NFL level. Struggle at the quarterback position. Jacoby Criswell, in 12 games, completed only 58%. Threw for 2,400 yards, 15 touchdowns, but 6 INTs. Could not push the ball down the field. Only averaged 7.7 yards per attempt. That is certainly not going to be good enough if you're talking about competing at a major college level. Now, let's flip it over to the defense. Because when I look at the defensive numbers, I see some significant struggles here in aspects of their defense. Once again, using that baseline number of 68, how many of North Carolina's opponents' offenses were inside of the top 68? Well, Minnesota was 58th. Duke was 59th. Pitt, 65th. Georgia Tech, 61st. Then you don't see another opponent inside of the top 68 until their final 2 games. Boston College, 54th. NC State, 43rd. Less than half of their opponents are inside of the top 68. Folks, none of their opponents were inside of the top 40. When you look at the average offensive power ranking for their opponents, 72. So now you're not even playing what would be considered a Power 4 schedule week in and week out. You're now probably a high-end group of 6 scheduled week in and week out. North Carolina's defense their stats should look a lot better considering the caliber opponents that they went up against. Let's dive in. North Carolina allowed 28 points per game last year. We had them at 29, so not a big difference there. North Carolina gave up 233 yards passing per game. We had them at giving up 235. So again, small variance there. The big variance comes right here. North Carolina's rush defense, on the surface, you would think would be really good. 144.4 yards per game is what they allowed, below the NCAA average. However, when we adjust for opponent, that number balloons up to 185 yards per game rushing, over a 40-yard per game difference. This is why we do what we do. We're trying to go beyond just the surface level numbers to really understand what these teams really look like. Their total offense, on the surface, they gave up 377, basically right there at the NCAA average. When we adjust for opponent, that number balloons up to 420 yards a game. Again, a difference of about 43 yards per game. If you want to kind of marry that out in your mind, think about this. Almost half of a football difference is what they truly were giving up on a per game basis. That kind of crystallizes it and brings it really home for you. Remember the numbers that I gave out as far as the NCAA average, as far as drives ending with the score, drives ending with a touchdown and third down conversion. North Carolina's defense, worse than the NCAA average. Their opponents ending with either a touchdown or a field goal 43% of the time compared to 40%, which is the NCAA average. Drives ending with a touchdown, pretty much right on pace or par with what the NCAA average is. Said it was about 29%. That's where North Carolina was, 28.6. So rounded up, you're right at 29. Opponents converting on third downs, a little bit better than the NCAA average. Their opponents converting on third downs 35% of the time. North Carolina did a great job of getting after the quarterback last year. Were able to generate 34 sacks, 11 better than the NCAA average last year. However, their opponents found some success going forward on fourth down, 10 out of 19, basically right there at the NCAA average of about 53% conversion rate. North Carolina was right there at 53%, forced 15 turnovers. So we're not generating enough turnovers to really make an impact for their offense. Let's get into their 3 E's. How effective, explosive, and efficient was this defense last year? As far as effective defense, they were 65th. In not giving up explosive plays, they were 89th. So their opponents were finding a ton of success in big chunk plays. As far as being an efficient defense, they were 78th. North Carolina ended the season for us as the 75th best defense in college football. Yeah, definitely not good. Let's take a look at special teams. And what we get from special teams is a mixed bag. Really good as far as the field goal kicking goes, 15 out of 21, over 71%. I should say should have been better because they were below the NCAA average of 72%. So reliable kicking, not excellent kicking. Now, their punting unit, much better, 44.5 yards per punt. I ranked them 24th in the nation last year. So excellent job in that area. I talked about the coaching situation, Mack Brown, and what turned out to be his final season there as the head coach of North Carolina. As far as being an aggressive head coach going forward on fourth downs, that's not who Mack Brown is. But Mack Brown, one of the more conservative coaches as far as, or at least aggressive head coaches, I'll use that terminology. 68 out of 144 qualifying Division I coaches last year, 2-3 in one-score games, 1-1 against quality opponents. So this team absolutely struggled as far as being able to win those tightly contested games. Really cost this team last year. Now, let's take a look at how this offense performed in their wins versus their losses, and then we'll do the same thing for the defense. So 6-6. And we'll see that it wasn't a scoring issue for this team. I think we're going to find the issue was on the other side of the ball there. 35 points per game in their wins. Only 25 passing attempts in their wins for about 191 yards, 7.7 yards per pass attempt. Remember, I said quarterback did not do a great job of pushing the ball down the field. We saw that even in the games that they won. 12.3 yards per completion. Now, when they won, they were running the ball a lot and they were doing it well. 46 rushing attempts per game, 233 yards per game on the ground, 5.1 yards per carry. Omarion Hampton was probably going off in those games. Now, looking at what they were on third downs, converting on third down about 53% of the time in those wins, only committed 3 turnovers in those wins. Something else I'm looking at, they only went for it on fourth down 7 times in their wins. Now, in their 6 losses, still averaging almost 30 points per game. Now, the passing attempts go up significantly. 38 passing attempts per game. 277 yards passing. 7.2 yards per attempt. 13.2 yards per completion. Now, the rushing attempts go down. Only running the ball about 32 times per game in those losses for about 146 yards per game. 4.5 yards per rushing attempt. When we look at their third down conversions in those losses, they were converting third downs at a 27% clip, well below what it was when they were winning. They also went for it 15 times in those losses and committed 13 turnovers. So the difference between the Tar Heels last year when they won versus when they lost, they were scoring only about 5 more points per game, throwing the ball about 14 times less. Yes, the yards per game goes down 86 yards, but it's offset by getting those 87 yards in the ground game. So the difference was you were able to control the game clock situation through running the ball, something that you couldn't do in those losses. Let's flip it over to the defense now. In their 6 wins, this defense was playing lights out, only 14.3 points per game. Their opponents were averaging about 208 yards passing per game, doing that on 28 attempts, 7.3 yards per pass attempt, 13.1 yards per completion. Their opponents were running the ball 31 times per game, but only getting 61 yards per game on the ground, 2 yards per rushing attempt. Phenomenal defense there. Their opponents converting on third downs were phenomenal in their wins. Their opponents only converting 30% of the time on third downs, and they forced 10 turnovers. Now, in their 6 losses, different story, giving up 40 points per game. Opponents still throwing the ball only 1 more attempt per game, up to 30 passing attempts per game. The passing yards balloon up to 258 yards per game passing, 8.6 yards per attempt, 14.6 yards per completion. The rushing attempts go up significantly for their opponents in those losses. 44 rushing attempts per game, giving up 228 yards per game on the ground, 5.2 yards per rushing attempt. So more than double the average yards per rushing attempt and almost 165 more yards rushing per game. Looking at their opponents' third down conversions when they lost, opponents were converting about 38% on third downs, could only force 5 turnovers in those 6 losses. So when this team lost, giving up 26 more points. So you're basically looking at almost 4 additional touchdowns per game in those losses, giving up 50 more yards rushing per game 167 yards per game more rushing. So when this team lost, their opponents were gaining almost 217 additional yards per game. That, my friends, is how you lose your head coach and make significant changes. So what went wrong for the Tar Heels in 2024? I would say defensive breakdowns in their losses. I just highlighted those stats for you. The turnover differential hurt offensive efficiency when this team could not get the ball back to their offense, could not get control of the game script. And that really hurt North Carolina in several key games last year. If I go back and look, just trying to take a quick glance here. So in some of those closer losses, you could just really see it just stick out. Offense was still putting up points, but could never get control of the game when they lost. Finally, what went wrong? Red zone struggles in key points cost North Carolina at least 2 wins last year. So I think we're ready to get to the final grade for the Tar Heels. Folks, the North Carolina Tar Heels will get a C+ from us in Mac Brown's final year as the head coach there at North Carolina. The team just really struggled. Balanced offense, yes. Capable passing game and rushing attack, yes. Solid special teams, yes. Poor rush defense, absolutely. Inconsistent execution and costly turnovers. Final verdict, North Carolina had the offensive talent to be a better team, but defensive lapses and a lack of situational awareness prevented them from exceeding expectations last year. So in our final few minutes, we know Bill Belichick is taking over as the new pit boss there for the Tar Heels. What is Coach Belichick going to look to improve on in 2025? First thing first, offensive consistency. This team was in the 40s in our 3 E's: effectiveness, efficiency, and explosiveness. This team must improve their execution on offense, and they're going to have to do it without their best offensive player in Omarion Hampton, who I project to be at least middle of the first round pick in the upcoming draft here in just a couple of months. Second key is this team must improve their defensive metrics. The expectations with one of the greatest defensive minds in football history in Bill Belichick, I certainly expect this unit to be much improved in 2025. And then finally, must limit the turnovers and then generate more turnovers on the defensive side of the ball. We know winning the turnover battle is crucial, especially in college football. If you can be +1, even +2 in a turnover battle, you're certainly going to win more games than you lose. If the North Carolina Tar Heels, under head coach Bill Belichick in his first season as a collegiate head coach, can improve the Tar Heels in these 3 areas, North Carolina can take a step forward and possibly make their way to a bowl game in 2025.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at CrunchTimeSportsAdvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.